Wherever you are in the world, welcome to another edition of Jerry's Take on China from my home again. And please don't forget, if you enjoy the content, like it, share it, and subscribe to my channel for more of the same. It's very important that we get these messages out to as many people as possible, and I am happy to see the growth of this channel. I still won't monetize it, but I will keep trying to promote it. Due to the recent discovery that Uyghur academic Rahil Dawood has been sentenced to life imprisonment in China, Xinjiang is back in the news. But strangely, or perhaps coincidentally, several days before that news became public, the US Embassy in Beijing did something very unusual. On its Weibo site, they issued a reference to a report. The State Department had issued this report in March, 6 months earlier, called the 2022 Country Reports on Human Rights Practices. Two interesting points are raised. One is the timing of the Weibo notice. It's 6 months late. And the other is that even though it's on Weibo, a Chinese site, in Chinese, it's still there. The Chinese government have never removed it. 10 weeks after launching the report, Blinken was in China. He met with Xinjiang in Beijing, and he obviously acted with the appropriate levels of diplomacy. He was allowed an escalation to meet with Wang Yi, and later the same day with President Xi Jinping. The presidential meeting wasn't announced until early afternoon, and it took place late afternoon, in what I think is a clear indication that the escalations had been predicated on Blinken's behavior. Had he arrived in Beijing with all guns blazing, almost certainly his prearranged meeting with Xinjiang would still have taken place, but his remaining time in Beijing would have been designated a failure. He would have been meeting with diplomats and US business leaders. On meeting with Xi Jinping, Blinken showed deference. He listened to what Xi had to say, and then he walked out of the meeting and into a press briefing where he stated, and I quote, "We both agree on the need to stabilize our relationship." That's something. During questions, Blinken made a very interesting comment when he was asked about allegations that the USA is attempting to engage in dialogue and at the same time attempting to contain China. Blinken's response stated, quote, "It was important to me that we made clear the very clear difference between allegations that we're trying to contain China and decouple economically, as opposed to what we're actually doing." Those of us who know China know there have been human rights allegations, but those of us who live and travel in China know, as Secretary Blinken succinctly pointed out, there's a huge difference between allegations and reality. In the press briefing, Blinken dwelt on human rights issues for a total of 12 seconds of the 30-minute briefing. Only 12 seconds to encompass the very serious issues his department had reported 10 weeks earlier. There have been issues in China's Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, where China borders 8 different countries, including Afghanistan and Pakistan. Xinjiang is not a province, it's an autonomous region. It's effectively run by Uyghurs and other ethnic minorities. So the allegations mean that Uyghurs are oppressing Uyghurs. Following a series of terrorist incidents, a security clampdown did indeed occur. Many people were arrested, some were imprisoned, and some remain in prison for their actions. But visitors to the region can mix and mingle with ethnic minorities. Questions can be asked and answered. Anyone can do this, whether they be foreigners or Chinese. If you have a Chinese visa or a Chinese passport, you are entitled to unrestricted Xinjiang access. I did it. I've cycled over 5,000 kilometers in Xinjiang, once in 2014, shortly after the clampdown, and again in 2019 when it was in full force. These are not staged, managed visits to tourist destinations. Cycling across the region means stopping every 20 or 30 kilometers and interacting with local people in the stores, in the restaurants, and in the guest houses. I was never stopped or questioned by the police. I was never asked what I was doing except out of curiosity, and I was never asked to show my photos or videos to anyone in authority, nor was I prevented from going anywhere that I wanted to go. Take a look online at Xinjiang. Such is the level of success of the US propaganda, your search results will be full of allegations of misdeeds by China. However, if you search a little deeper and you word your questions appropriately, you'll see why it was that in China, 2014, they acted swiftly and appropriately to stop the killings there. Civilians were dying in the streets. Was there abuse of power? Quite likely. In a massive security operation aimed at immediately preventing more terrorist attacks and deaths, there would have been. But can any country in the world claim no police abuse? It would be highly doubtful, but we can be assured that if there is one, it's not the USA. There are some people in prison who shouldn't be there. Or are they? It's possible. But once again, is there a country in the world that has never mistakenly locked up a civilian? If that is the case, it's surely not the USA again. Are there systemic abuses of power or people incarcerated for the crime of merely being Uyghur in the region? Absolutely not. Anyone traveling there can see this. But we don't need to travel there. We don't need to go so far. It's a long way. There are many Chinese social media accounts. Massive amounts of e-commerce transactions are done through Taobao. There are even Twitter accounts coming from the region, often ignored as propaganda. But if you take a look at them and see for yourself, they show everyday scenes. Farmers working and selling products, locals dancing, extravagant shopping malls and glittering infrastructure. If this is stage managed, if this is a Potemkin village, it's one that encompasses over 20 million people, almost 12 million of whom are from this allegedly oppressed minority in the region. And that's a 1.6 million square kilometer Potemkin village. Xinjiang has been stabilized. It has been lifted out of abject poverty. Its Uyghur population has grown from 8.34 million to 11.62 million during the very period of Blinken's department saying there was a genocide. Whilst forced labor and oppression are being alleged, 89.4% of school leavers attend tertiary education. Life expectancy in the region has increased in just 70 years from 30 to 74.4. That hardly seems oppressive. When the report, as this does, contains 26 uses of the word may in the context of something China might be doing, and 32 uses of the word could to indicate some degree of possibility, but the only evidence offered is speculation about China and what they might, may, could, or are alleged to have done. It's highly likely that the report is wrong. As Blinken quite rightly states, we need to look at the reality on the ground. When we do, we find a very different story. The US Embassy would be much better placed to go and take a look rather than amplify allegations where their only reason not to take a look must be a fear of an inconvenient truth. To take a leaf from their own book, they may not be telling the truth. Thanks once again for watching Jerry's Take on China, and I will